My name is Sophia Reynolds, and I'm a 34-year-old single mother living in New York City with my 3 daughters, Lily, Sophie, and Mia. They are my whole world, the reason I wake up every morning, the reason I keep going no matter how exhausted I am. Life hasn't been kind to me, but I never let it break me. Their father left us when Mia was still a baby. No warnings, no goodbyes, just gone. He never called, never sent money, never asked about them. Just vanished like we never existed. From that moment, I knew that if I wanted my daughters to have a chance at a good life, I had to be everything for them. I had no degree, no real skills aside from my ability to work hard. So I became a taxi driver. Not an easy job. Not for a woman alone in this city. But it was a job that put money in my hands every day. But it was never enough. I didn't own the car I drove. Every month I rented it, and by the time I paid for that and gas, the profit barely covered our rent and food. I worked until my body ached, often pulling double shifts, barely sleeping. There was no other option. I had no family to help, no one to lean on, just my girls and the unrelenting pressure to keep going no matter what. I never let them see how much I struggled. They didn't know about the bills I hid in drawers, the meals I skipped so they could eat, the nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, terrified of what would happen if I ever couldn't provide. I tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Everything will be okay. We'll always be together. I won't let anything happen to you. And then, one night, everything changed. The cold was unbearable, seeping through the windows, making my fingers stiff as I gripped the wheel. I had just finished a shift, and all I wanted was to get my daughters home. Mia shivered in the back seat, barely able to keep her eyes open. I turned on the heat, but the old car barely responded. The roads were slick, the streetlights casting a dim glow over the frozen pavement. I was so tired. I told myself I just needed to make it a few more blocks, just get them home. Then, a flash of blinding light, a deafening crash. Pain exploded through my body. Everything went dark. When I woke up, all I saw was a white ceiling. The sharp beeping of machines echoed in my ears. The sterile scent of the hospital filling my lungs. My body felt heavy, weak. Then the panic hit. My daughters. I tried to move, but pain shot through my leg, making me gasp. Something was wrong. I could barely lift my arms, my entire body, aching like I had been crushed under something enormous. I had been in an accident, but I didn't care about that. I needed to know, were my daughters okay? Tears burned my eyes as I struggled to form words, my throat dry, my voice barely a whisper. I heard footsteps, then a soft voice telling me to stay still. I barely listened. My mind was spinning, flashing through memories of the crash, the blinding light, the impact. Then the door opened. 3 small figures rushed toward me, their tiny hands grabbing mine, their faces streaked with tears. Lily, Sophie, Mia. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt their warm little hands wipe my tears away. They were safe. That was all that mattered. But I wasn't. A doctor came in, his expression serious. I already knew what he was going to say before he opened his mouth. A broken leg. Surgery. Months of recovery. I wouldn't be able to work. I wouldn't be able to drive. I couldn't take care of my daughters. And then came the worst part. The car, the rented car, was destroyed. And the vehicle I had hit, a luxury car worth more than anything I had ever owned. The owner wanted $20,000 in damages. I felt everything inside me collapse. For years, I had fought through exhaustion, pain, and fear, never allowing myself to fall. But now, I had nothing left. No savings, no way to work, no way to pay my rent, buy food, or keep my daughters safe. For the first time in my life, I had no way out. The hospital room was too bright, too sterile. The beeping machines, the lingering scent of antiseptic, the weight of the thin hospital blanket over my aching body. It all felt distant, unreal. But the pain in my leg was real. The dull throb in my ribs, the heaviness in my chest, all of it was real. But nothing was as real as the fear. Lily, Sophie, and Mia sat beside me, their small hands gripping mine. Their faces were still streaked with dried tears, their eyes wide and filled with worry. They didn't understand what had happened, not fully. They knew we had been in a crash, they knew I was hurt, but they had no idea how broken I really was. I had no savings to fall back on. I had no family to call. I had no way to work, no way to provide, no way to keep our home. For years, I had kept my struggles hidden from them. I had smiled when I was exhausted, reassured them when I was drowning. I had carried the weight alone so they wouldn't have to. Now I couldn't carry anything. I squeezed their hands, forcing a weak smile, pretending for just a little longer that everything was okay. But the moment the nurse came in and gently led them out of the room, my composure cracked. I broke. Tears slipped down my face, hot and silent at first, then uncontrollable, shaking my entire body. For the first time in my life, I felt completely helpless. I had fought for so long. I had sacrificed everything, worked until my body gave out, done everything I could to keep my daughters safe. And now it wasn't enough. I covered my face with my hands, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The fear was suffocating. The rent was due in 2 weeks. There was no money. How would I pay for food? How would I keep the electricity on? I had always found a way. Always. But this time, there was no way out. The door creaked open, and before I could wipe my tears away, tiny arms wrapped around me. Lily, Sophie, Mia. They had come back. They held me, their warm little hands patting my arms, my back, their soft voices whispering to me, telling me they loved me, that it was okay. And I cried harder. I had spent so many years protecting them. Now here they were, trying to protect me. I wanted to tell them that it would be okay, that I would fix this just like I had always done. But I couldn't fix this. The next morning, the nurses brought me my phone. The screen was flooded with missed calls, unread messages. And then I saw it. My story had spread. I didn't know how, but someone had shared what had happened, the accident, my situation, my daughters. People online had seen their faces, read about our struggles, and they cared. Donations had started coming in. Strangers, people who had never met me, who owed me nothing, were sending money, leaving messages of encouragement. I scrolled through, my hands shaking. Some messages were simple. Stay strong, you're not alone. Others were personal, people sharing their own stories of hardship, telling me that if they had survived, so could I. I didn't know how to process it. I had spent my whole life believing I had no one. Now suddenly people across the world were reaching out, trying to help. And then came the call, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, staring at the screen. Then slowly I answered. A deep voice on the other end. He told me he had heard my story. He told me he wanted to help. My heart pounded. Who was this man? And why did he care? Something about his voice sent chills down my spine. Not from fear, but from the unfamiliar feeling of hope. The second day in the hospital felt heavier than the first. The pain in my leg was constant, a dull, unrelenting ache. But the real weight pressing down on me wasn't physical. It was the uncertainty, the crushing realization that even after I healed, I had no way to rebuild what had already been falling apart. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the monitors. My daughters were curled up on the chair beside my bed, their tiny hands wrapped around each other. They were exhausted, their small bodies worn out from the stress of seeing their mother like this. I stroked Mia's hair, absent-mindedly, my mind racing. I had nothing left to give them. No job, no home, no money. The weight of that thought made my chest tighten. And then just when I thought I had reached the very bottom, something unexpected happened. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting visitors. I barely had anyone in my life who would come. My pulse quickened as the door opened, revealing a group of people standing there, their arms full of flowers, food, and bags filled with clothes. For a moment I thought they had the wrong room. I blinked in confusion as one of the women stepped forward, setting a bouquet of bright sunflowers on my bedside table. She smiled warmly, telling me they had heard my story and wanted to help. My story. Had the hospital staff spread it? Had someone shared what happened to me online? I was still struggling to comprehend what was happening when the last person walked in. A young man. He stood at the edge of the room, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. His eyes, calm, kind, met mine. And for a reason I couldn't explain, I felt a sudden chill run through me. Not from fear, from something else. I didn't recognize him. And yet, there was something about the way he looked at me that made me feel as if he already knew me, as if he had been watching my pain unfold long before today. He finally stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, like he knew I wasn't sure if I could trust him yet. Then he spoke. He told me he had heard about my struggles, that he knew what I had been through, knew how hard I had fought, how much I had sacrificed. He told me he wanted to help. I didn't believe it. Why would a stranger care? What did he want from me? My fingers curled into the thin hospital blanket, my breath shallow, as I tried to make sense of the words coming out of his mouth. But then he said something that made my heart stop. He had already paid off my hospital bills. I didn't owe the hospital anything anymore. The debt was gone. I felt the world tilt beneath me. For so long, all I had known was struggle. Every decision, every choice had been weighed down by the reality of money. How much I had, how much I still needed, how much I would never have. And now, just like that, a stranger had erased one of the heaviest burdens from my shoulders. I should have thanked him. I should have cried, smiled, said something. But I couldn't. I just stared at him, my mind refusing to believe this was real. The weight of my exhaustion, the constant stress of survival, it had become a part of me. It was all I had ever known. And suddenly, for the first time, something was being lifted. But it wasn't over. A few days later, he came back. This time, he asked me if I was strong enough to walk. Confused, I nodded, though my legs still ached. He helped me into a wheelchair, and my daughters followed as he pushed me down the hospital hallway out into the crisp winter air. A black car waited for us outside. The moment we got in, he told me he wanted to show me something. We drove through the city, the silence thick, until we reached a quiet neighborhood lined with small but beautiful homes. And then he stopped. We got out, and he led me to the front of one of the houses. It was warm, welcoming, more than I had ever dreamed of having for my daughters. And then, standing there in the cold, he turned to me and placed something small in my hands. A key. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. It couldn't be. I turned to him, my hands trembling. But he just smiled. The house was mine, a home. For the first time in years, we had a home. I fell to my knees, tears pouring down my face, sobs racking my body as my daughters clung to me, crying just as hard. For so long, I had fought. I had broken myself trying to keep us safe. And now, for the first time, we were. This wasn't just kindness. This was a miracle. The walls of my new home still didn't feel real. Every morning, I woke up expecting to find myself back in the tiny, drafty apartment where rent was always due and the fridge was always half empty. But then I'd step out of my bedroom and see my daughters curled up on a soft couch, wrapped in warm blankets, the sunlight pouring in through real curtains. Not the thin, makeshift ones from our old place that barely blocked the cold, a home that truly belonged to us. We weren't running anymore. The fear that had followed me for years, the weight of barely surviving, was gone. For the first time in my life, I didn't wake up dreading the day ahead. I didn't have to check my bank account, already knowing what I would find, barely enough to scrape by. But the relief, as beautiful as it was, carried something else with it. What comes next? For so long, I had been in survival mode. Every thought, every decision had been about making it through another day. I had been a taxi driver, a woman working endlessly just to put food on the table, to keep the lights on, to make sure my daughters had enough to get by. There had never been room for anything else. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room, still overwhelmed by this new reality, the young man who had changed my life sat across from me. He watched my daughters play in the next room, their laughter filling the house in a way that made my chest ache. I hadn't realized how rare it had been to hear them laugh like that. Not the small, careful giggles I'd heard in the past, but real, full, unburdened laughter. Then, without warning, he asked me a question that I hadn't let myself consider in years. What is your biggest dream? The words sat between us, heavy and foreign. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I had no answer. A dream? I hadn't thought about dreams in a long time. People like me didn't get to dream. People like me worked until there was nothing left, hoping it would be enough to keep the people we loved safe. For a moment, I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. But then I looked at my daughters, their tiny faces glowing with joy, and I realized something. I had spent so long making sure they had what they needed. But what kind of example was I setting if I never let myself hope for more? I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and told the truth. I've always wanted to own a supermarket. It sounded ridiculous the moment I said it. But when I looked at him, he didn't laugh. He didn't tell me it was impossible. He didn't remind me of all the reasons it could never happen. Instead, he smiled, "Let's make it happen." I had spent my whole life being told what I couldn't do, that I wasn't enough, that I didn't have the education, the money, the resources to build anything of my own. But suddenly, there was someone telling me that I could. The next few months were a whirlwind. I spent every moment learning, planning, preparing. The young man introduced me to people who knew about business, finance, and supply chains. He guided me, but never took over. He made sure I was in control of my own future. And then one day, my dream became real. I stood outside my own supermarket, the sign above the door shining in the afternoon sun. It wasn't a massive chain or a fancy boutique store. It was warm, welcoming, filled with fresh food, bright lights, and stocked shelves. It was mine. No more working long nights, driving strangers around, just to scrape by. No more exhaustion that made my bones ache, my head heavy, my body break down. I was a businesswoman, a provider, a success. I had built this. The store quickly became more than just a business. It became a part of the community, People came and they kept coming back. Customers greeted me by name, smiling as they filled their baskets. They weren't just shopping, they were supporting something that had meaning. And as the days passed, I realized something even bigger was happening. I was changing. For years, I had only known fear. The fear of losing everything, of failing my daughters, of not being enough. That fear had been my shadow, following me through every shift, every sleepless night, every impossible choice. Now, for the first time, that fear was gone. I could breathe, I could rest, and my daughters could finally be children. They didn't have to see their mother exhausted and broken every day. They didn't have to worry when I'd come home or if there would be enough food for dinner. They had a home where they could laugh, play, and sleep without worry. One night, after the store had closed, I walked through the aisles alone, my fingers brushing against the stock shelves, the fresh produce, the warm bread still cooling in the bakery section. I thought about every step it had taken to get here, every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of hopelessness. I had started with nothing, and now I had everything. No more hunger, no more fear, no more struggling. Just a mother who had finally built the life she had always dreamed of for her daughters. I will never forget the man who changed my life. Even now, when I wake up in a warm bed, in a house that belongs to me, surrounded by my daughter's laughter, instead of the crushing weight of survival, I still think about him. The stranger who stepped in when I had lost all hope, when I had nothing left to give. I don't know why he chose me. I don't know what made him look at my story and decide that I was worth saving. I've spent so many nights wondering, trying to understand. But in the end, I realized it didn't matter. Some people help not because they have to, but because they can. I had never believed people like that existed. My whole life had been proof of the opposite. Struggling alone, fighting for every dollar, for every bit of stability, I had convinced myself that the world was cold, unforgiving, that no one cared. But I was wrong. There are good people in this world, people who see pain and don't look away, people who reach out even when they don't have to, people who choose kindness simply because they believe in making the world a better place. And because of them, I am no longer the woman I used to be. I spent years living in fear. The fear of losing my daughters, of failing them, of not being enough. That fear had ruled my life, dictated every choice I made, kept me trapped in a cycle of exhaustion. But now I am free. Not just free from financial struggle, but free from the belief that I had to do everything alone. That's why I knew I couldn't keep this gift to myself. For so long, I was the one in need. Now I wanted to be the one who helped. It started small. A meal for a mother I saw sitting outside a grocery store with two small children, their coats too thin for the cold. A job offer for a young woman who came into my store, her eyes hollow with the same hunger I used to feel. Then I started doing more. I donated part of my earnings to organizations that helped struggling mothers, women like me, women who were just trying to make it to the next day. I helped set up a local program that provided food, warm clothes, and job resources to single parents. I didn't do it because I had to. I did it because I could. And I taught my daughters to do the same. Lily, Sophie, and Mia had spent too many years watching me struggle. They had seen the fear in my eyes, the exhaustion in my body, the way I forced smiles when I had nothing left to give. Now I wanted them to see something else. I wanted them to see that kindness matters, that gratitude is powerful, that no matter how much we have, we always have something to give. They help me in the store, stocking shelves, greeting customers with bright smiles. And when they see someone in need, they don't look away. They ask how they can help. because they remember. They remember what it was like to be hungry, to be cold, to be afraid, and they remember the kindness that saved us. I don't know if I will ever be able to repay the man who helped me, but I do know that I can carry his kindness forward. And in doing so, I honor the gift he gave me, the chance to believe in something greater than survival, the chance to believe in hope. One evening, as I closed up my supermarket for the night, I noticed a woman outside the store. She had 2 young children clinging to her, their eyes darting nervously as they stood near the entrance. She wasn't begging, she wasn't asking for anything, but I knew the look on her face. It was the same look I had worn so many times before. I stepped outside, carrying a bag filled with bread, milk, and fruit, and handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she accepted it, her eyes wide with surprise. She started to protest, but I shook my head. I had been where she was. I knew how it felt to be ashamed of needing help. I simply smiled and told her it was okay because it was. Because kindness should never come with conditions. Because someone once helped me, expecting nothing in return. And because this was how I repaid him. Not with money, but with the promise that his kindness would never stop with me. The morning sunlight poured through the windows, casting a golden glow over the living room. The sound of laughter echoed from the kitchen, where Lily and Sophie were setting the table, carefully arranging plates, while Mia hummed to herself, swinging her legs from a chair too tall for her. I watched them from across the room, my heart swelling with something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years. Peace. For so long, my life had been consumed by survival. Every thought had been about the next paycheck, the next bill, the next meal I had to put on the table. The fear of losing everything had been a shadow that followed me through every waking moment. But now, for the first time, that fear was gone. I glanced around at the space we now called home. It was more than just a house, it was security, a place where my daughters could grow up without worry, where they could be children without carrying the weight of my burdens. Every inch of it was proof of how far we had come. I owed this life to the stranger who had stepped in when I had lost all hope. I never truly understood why he chose me, why he saw my story and decided that I was worth saving. But because of him, I was standing here today, with a life I had once only dreamed of. He had given me more than just money or stability. He had given me a future. I closed my eyes for a moment, whispering a silent thank you, knowing that wherever he was, he had changed my life in a way I could never repay. Miracles exist. Kindness is real. Life can change in an instant, and sometimes the help we never expect is the help that saves us. I had started with nothing. No home, no support, no hope. Now I had everything, and for the first time in my life, I was truly happy. Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that life can change in an instant, and that kindness, even from a stranger, can be the lifeline someone desperately needs. In today's world, many people are struggling, whether financially, emotionally, or simply trying to find their way. The lesson here is that no one truly succeeds alone. Help can come from unexpected places, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change a life. If you are facing hardship, remember that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. There are people willing to support you, whether it's through a community, an organization, or a single act of generosity from someone who sees your struggle. And if you are in a position to help others, do so, not because you have to, but because you can. Success is not just about personal achievement. It's about what you do when you've made it. Lifting others up, just as you were lifted, creates a ripple effect of goodness. Sophia paid forward the kindness she received, and we should all strive to do the same. Because in the end, what we give is what truly lasts. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and follow for more inspiring content.